Engineering is the art of directing the great sources of power in nature for the use and convenience of man. If I might be so bold as to add to those words of English author and engineer Thomas Treadgold, the piece of engineering in question is all the more impressive if it remains standing 2,000 years after it was constructed. Hi, my name is Dylan, and welcome to Pondering Adventurer, where I cover travel, history, and the outdoors. And today we're going to explore one of the most incredible feats of ancient engineering that still survives today, the Aqueduct of Segovia. About 60 miles north of the Spanish capital city of Madrid is the ancient city of Segovia. Settlement here dates back at least 2,700 years, long before Romans and Moors, to a time when it was just Celts and Iberians. Today, Segovia is home to many famous sites, including the cathedral, Alcazar, and nearby 18th century royal palace at San Ildefonso. None, however, have been the prominent feature of the city for the last 2 millennia like the aqueduct has. This massive, nearly 100-foot tall wall of arches divides the city center and attracts visitors from around the world. But what exactly is it? And who built it? And how did they do so? The ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, in describing Egyptian priestly duties, says, "When water is brought in a vase with the most reverent solemnity to the sanctuary and the temple, they prostrate themselves on the ground and, raising their hands to heaven, thank the divine beneficence for its creation." Water is essential to life. An aqueduct is simply a structure used to transport water over land, and the Romans were second to none in building them. Roman efforts to take control of the Iberian Peninsula began in the 3rd century BC during the Punic Wars against their rivals, the Carthaginians. After 200 years of civil wars and battling Iberian tribes, the Roman provinces that comprised Hispania reached some stability under the rule of Augustus. In the centuries that followed, an explosion of Roman building projects took place across the empire. It was likely around the turn of the 2nd century AD, possibly during the reign of Emperor Trajan, that the aqueduct at Segovia was built. Author John O'Lendering says, "Segovia became a part of Hispania Tarraconensis, Conventus of Clunia, situated on the new road between Caesar Augusta, modern Zaragoza, and Emerita Augusta, modern Merida. Segovia's location between major settlements would dictate that it should be ready to refresh and resupply both Roman legions and merchants alike. To bring fresh water to the city, the Romans found their source 10 miles away at the Frio River. A major challenge to transport the water into the city itself was the 100-foot deep valley that it needed to bridge. This location is the most prominent of the aqueduct. The Aqueduct of Segovia is comprised of approximately 24,000 granite blocks. They're used to create 165 arches, which in the valley are double-tiered and raise the aqueduct nearly 100 feet from the ground. This 20,000-ton span of arches requires support from a 20-foot deep foundation below ground. Maybe the most impressive part, however, is that this monumental piece of ancient architecture was constructed largely without mortar. How were the Romans able to build this engineering marvel that still stands 2,000 years later without mortar to hold the blocks in place? The answer lies in clever yet precise engineering. First, a proper selection of quarry stones must be made. Vitruvius the architect tells us how this was done. The stone should be quarried no less than 2 years before the time for building arrives, and in the summer rather than winter, and it should remain on the ground in the open. Stone that has been damaged by weathering during the 2-year period should be thrown into the foundations. The rest, which will not have been damaged, has been tested by nature and will be capable of lasting when built into structures above ground. In order to place these blocks in a way that was capable of load-bearing as well as ensuring longevity, the Roman engineers needed to accurately identify the gravity points of the blocks. This was true for the piers or columns that support the arches, as well as the arches themselves. Jos Tomlow, in his paper Observations on the Design and Building of the Roman Segovia Aqueduct, describes the findings of Segovia restoration architect Francisco Jurado Jimenez. He says, Francisco concluded that the Segovia Aqueduct was designed properly for its own weight loading. The pier sections grow in their area along with the increase in load. He also calculated what would happen if one of the lower arches were to fail and collapse. The result is that the thrust of the next lower arch does not force a pier to collapse. With a strong section of well-balanced piers ready to bear weight, the next challenge for the Romans was the arches. Rome took great pride in its ability to create both functional and aesthetically pleasing stone arches. They even built them to commemorate the great military victories of their leaders. Here in Segovia, Roman precision was used on every block. In order for the arches to have the most stability, the wedge stones called voussoirs needed to be examined and a center of gravity established. To do this, they may have used formulas handed down from Archimedes. The gravity point would be marked on the sides and holes created in those spots. Jos Tomlow describes how they would test if they were correct. He says, the layout of the arch is considered to be tested on ground level, turned all blocks on their side 90 degrees. During hoisting with iron forceps, the block turns naturally in the position it will take in the arch layout. The Romans likely either used their 5-pulley crane, the pentaspastos, or their largest crane, the polyspastos, along with the iron forceps called ferrae forfices to lift the stones by their hoisting grip holes. If everything was measured correctly, the stone would naturally tilt to the angle it would sit in on the arch, thus creating ultimate stability. These hoisting grip holes are still visible on the aqueduct today. Also visible today are small indentations along the edges of some of the blocks. Jos Tomlow hypothesizes that these were used for a type of cantilevering scaffolding. He says, they consist of a put log, the horizontal pole that inserts into the wall's face and carries the scaffold boards, oblique braces, and a standard, which is a vertical pole along the wall. All knots are firmly bound together with thread, leather strips, or other rope material. With the scaffolding, workers could accurately place the blocks as they were lowered by the crane and forceps. The Romans also had a built-in solution for water decantation. Decantation is the process of separating liquids from solids. Because the Romans sourced their water for Segovia from the Frio River, they needed to separate the river sands from the water being sent through the aqueduct. To do this, they built a stone building with a water settling tank below called a piscine limarie. When the water entered the tank, its flow through the system would slow. This gave time for heavy sediments to fall to the bottom and the water to continue and leave them behind. Cleaner water would reach the city and blockages along the aqueduct would be greatly reduced. The piscine limarie at Segovia is still there today. Here, almost 2,000 years ago, the Romans found the best water source for the city. They channeled it for 10 miles in over 100-foot gaps using weather-tested granite blocks. The blocks were analyzed and balanced and carefully placed to form a bridge of double-tiered arches. And the water that traveled through which was decanted, providing the cleanest water possible for its citizens. Looking at the aqueduct is impressive, but thinking about the precise and clever engineering behind it may be more impressive. A quote from English novelist James Hilton comes to mind to end this video. I often think that the Romans were fortunate. Their civilization reached as far as hot baths, without touching the fatal knowledge of machinery. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you're interested in other historic topics like the Battle of Thermopylae, then consider checking out some of my other videos as well. So thanks again, and I'll see you on the next one.